Hey guys, Anjanette here. I hope everyone is doing well and staying healthy. Thank you for turning in your position paper on breastfeeding. I really enjoyed reading those. You will get your grade back within the next week or so. So they all look really amazing. So thank you for that. And we are going to talk about chapter 5, which is on physical growth, health, and nutrition, which I think is a lot of things to squeeze into one chapter. But yeah, so let's get started. I think there's a lot to be said for physical growth, and I think that with health and nutrition all kind of coincides together, and I think that's why the author decided to put all this information into one chapter. But yeah, so I will tell you a little bit about my history with nutrition with my own children and what that has been like. When I was pregnant with Rochelle, I was very conscious about the foods that I was consuming, knowing that everything that I was eating was then going to her. And then also once she was born and I started breastfeeding, I was also very conscious about what I was eating, because I'd heard stories about, women that eat chili and then their child tries to drink their breast milk from their body and they're unable to do so because of the spices in the chili. And I was like, whoa, that's crazy. I never thought that would happen. Rochelle never had any type of intolerance like that. And I eat a lot of spicy food. I joke around and I tell people that I put sriracha on my sriracha. So yeah, I've just always been a very big fan of spicy food. I continued to eat spicy food when I was pregnant with Rochelle and Jacob, and I continued to eat it while breastfeeding both of them as well. I probably didn't use as much sriracha, but I definitely ate a fair amount of it, and Tabasco sauce and Tapatio and all those amazing spices. But yeah, so a little bit about that history. I think it's very important to say again that breastfeeding can be very difficult, but given the proper support and everything, women try to make it happen. I want to demonstrate with you ways that you can try to breastfeed a child without it being super obvious if you're out in public. So let me get that real quick. So I have my cute little baby. Ta-da! Look at this. And then the thing that you'll need is also some type of blanket or cover up. Right now on the market there are these beautiful cover ups that they make that are really nice and women love them. But if you don't have that, you can just use a little blanket. So the trick is to throw the blanket over your shoulder, right, so that you're covered, and then you take the baby and put it up under there, and then you're able to remove your shirt and then breastfeed the baby, right? And that way you're comfortable, your baby's comfortable, no one can see what's going on. I know it's 2020, but people still kind of get freaked out when it comes to women that are breastfeeding their babies in public. So just do that, and that way people aren't harassing you about what's going on, and all that stuff. And then when you're done, you take your baby out, give them a little burp, and they go bleh, and then they burp. Hopefully it doesn't go all over you, and then your baby's happy and so are you. The crazy thing about breastfeeding, I know it talked about how your breasts are never empty, which I think is amazing and true. One thing that I didn't realize when I had Jacob, who was a very, what's the word I want to say, intense, passionate about breastfeeding, is that we would get home from school, we'd have dinner, all that stuff, and he would nurse for a good 2 hours. An hour on one side, an hour on the other side. And he would just sit there and he would just suck and nurse. And my husband Josh was like, what are you doing? This is taking forever, And I'm like, that's what he does, But then luckily he was able to go down and lay down, and he would sleep pretty much through the night. He sometimes would wake up once during the night, and I'd have to feed him for about 20 minutes, which is not bad at all. So considering how young he was and everything. But yeah, and then I also made a fancy fancy little diagram here. I'll show you guys. Da-da-da. Look at my fancy drawing. This is why I'm not an art major. So when you pump breast milk into a container and then you let it sit, it's gonna separate and you're gonna see the 3 different layers, which I think is really impressive. So the first part that comes out of your breast is very watery, and that's gonna go to the bottom. And then the middle part is gonna be the largest amount, and it's gonna be a little bit thicker. And then up here at the top is gonna be what almost looks like a solid. And it's crazy the way it separates like that. And then before you give it to your baby, you're gonna wanna do a little swirl with the bottle. You're not gonna wanna shake it up because that will break up the breast milk, and you don't wanna do that. So you just wanna take it and give a little, and you can see the parts of the breast milk mixing together. And then when you go to heat it, you always wanna heat breast milk in a glass container, not in plastic. We've gone to people's houses before, and people have come over to our house and they're like, oh, let me heat up my breast milk in this plastic bottle. And I'm like, no, what are you doing? Don't do that. So heat it in glass, and then you can put it into the plastic bottle and then give it to your baby that way. I'm very adamant about plastic should not go in the microwave ever. The best way to heat up breast milk is to put it in the glass container and then heat some water and then submerge the breast milk in the glass container in that water to where it gets warm, and that way you're doing that instead of heating it up in the microwave. There are people that have heated breast milk in the microwave, but you just want to be really careful that it doesn't get hot spots, and then you want to also make sure you swirl it around before giving it to the baby as well. So I hope that helps people understand the things with breast milk. I'm gonna say 99% of companies, organizations, or all that are pro women breastfeeding in their establishment, as long as you try to be modest and cover yourself up, that type of thing. Right after we had Rochelle, my husband and I were still carpooling back and forth when she would come to school here at the CDL, and so I would sit and I would wait for him to get done working at the Mercedes-Benz dealership, and I'm like, hey, she's hungry, I'm gonna go feed her. So I would go, I would take my cover up, I would sit in the lobby. They had a really nice sofa to sit on. I would just sit there and be covered up, and we'd just be hanging out, and we'd be watching whatever they had on the TV, and she would be nursing, and it was wonderful. And people would walk by and, hey, how you doing? And no one was ever like, what are you doing? You can't do that here, that type of thing. So it's really nice that people are a lot more welcoming of breastfeeding moms in this area that we live in, which is amazing. But keep in mind, there are not as many areas that are open-minded to that type of thing. So if you move to a different part of the world, you might have to be a better advocate for the importance of expectant moms, knowing, hey, it's important to breastfeed your baby. If you're able to do so, these are the resources, this is what we can make happen, that type of thing. So talking a little bit more about nutrition, Rochelle was a very interesting child in the fact that she was really interested in vegetables and not so much fruits, which is really unusual. Usually young children like the sweetness of fruits with its peaches and pineapple and strawberries and that type of thing. And she was more into green beans, peas, sweet potatoes. So that then in turn made her bowel movements a lot harder. And she would only have a bowel movement around every other day. And it was usually, a hard consistency, and I'd be like, oh, we gotta get her to eat some fruit. She would occasionally eat apple, not a huge fan of it, and I always had to peel it. And then when she got older, she wanted peeled and then with peanut butter. And then she would eat applesauce, but you have to have a lot of applesauce to make it into what is like the solid apple form. So then that would almost constipate her as well. So we really struggled a lot with her in constipation at the time. And then I didn't realize as time went on, and after I had Jacob, what it was really like for children. Bye! For children who really had severe constipation. And so for Rochelle's first birthday, we did the whole birthday cake and all that good stuff. and she pushed it away and said, peas, please. And everyone's looking at me like, Anjanette, what do you do? Why is your daughter obsessed with vegetables? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't really do anything. That's just what she eats. But yeah, she's always been a vegetable person. And even to this day, I mean, she's 7.5 years old and she loves Brussels sprouts and green beans and peas. I was joking with my coworkers a little bit ago, and I told them, you know, the other night I made little pizza, like we call them pizzas, mini pizzas, that I take crescent rolls and I lay it out, and then we do the sauce and the cheese and the toppings of, you know, black olives and onions and peppers and all that stuff. And she ate it, and she ate the whole thing, and then she was like, okay, I think I'm ready for my side. And Jacob was like, I want some chips. And Rochelle's like, can I have some peas? I'm like, of course you can have peas. You know, I got her up some frozen peas out of the freezer, and I put them in a dish and heated them up. No salt, no butter, no pepper, nothing, just plain peas. And she devoured the whole bowl. And I was like, well, do you want something else now? And she goes, no, I'm pretty full. I think I'm good. I'm like, okay, sounds good. Yeah, very unusual. I offer them all the foods that we eat. So I know there's some parents out there that will fix their children something to eat, and then the adults eat something else. I think families all should eat together, whether it's, you know, children eating and then you're modeling that eating behavior, so they can see you're eating the same thing they're eating the same thing you're eating, and that type of thing, because then that'll really get rid of the whole, oh, they want what mommy or daddy are eating, because you're all eating the same thing. So Jacob was a little bit different. So I'll tell you a crazy story about while I was pumping, and they say that with breast milk, the amount you produce, it's, you know, dependent on your mood, how stressed you are, how much you've eaten that day, how much water you've consumed, all those things. And I was having a conversation with one of my coworkers, and we were talking about fast cars and Trans Ams and how I love Trans Ams and all that stuff. And he was like, oh yeah, I saw one for sale the other day. And so I went in there and I was pumping the breast milk, and I looked and I was like, oh, let me look for Trans Ams for sale on the internet. I was just looking at different ones while I was pumping. And that day, I kid you not, I pumped more breast milk in the 45 minutes than I'd ever pumped in my life. And I pumped like 9.5 ounces. And I was like, this is a record, this is amazing. So clearly fast cars are my thing, and that helped me produce a lot of breast milk. I never was able to pump that much again. Even I was like, let me try looking at, you know, sports cars again and see what happens. Nope, it didn't happen. It was a one-time thing. Because usually I would pump between 7 and 8 ounces in the 45 minutes that I had to pump. And I will tell you, even though, you know, I work for the University of Georgia, which is a great establishment to work for, I really had to advocate for myself to my supervisor. Hey, I'm gonna need time to pump. She's someone who's really wonderful and understanding, but didn't have children of her own, so she didn't understand what all went to the whole process of getting ready to pump breast milk. And I told her, you know, she's like, oh, well, you get a 15-minute break in the morning, so we'll add another 5 minutes to that, and 20 minutes should be good. And I'm like, no, it takes you like 5 minutes just to get ready, you know, to take everything off, to get all your pump pieces put together, to, you know, suction it to your breast, and then you turn the pump on, and then you've got to sit there, and then you've got to like mentally relax, you know. So I did. I had about 45 minutes every morning to pump breast milk, and that was sufficient for me. But like I said, I had to, you know, advocate for myself for that. Luckily, my co-teachers were very supportive of that, and they were understanding. So it's really important to, you know, when that time comes for you to tell your supervisor, hey, this is what I'm gonna need. When Jacob was really little, before he came to the CDL, he was going to another child's house, and they had a nanny, and one of the moms worked in the public school system, you know, and I was like, oh, you know, how are you doing with the breastfeed and everything? And she was like, once I went back to work, we had to quit because I didn't have time to go out and pump, and then my milk supply went down, and then he kept needing to eat. So she goes, I would nurse a little bit at nighttime, but that still wasn't enough for him, so we just had to go straight to formula. And I really fell for her because I knew deep down inside she really wanted to continue breastfeeding exclusively, and she was not able to do so, you know. So just keep that in the back of your mind when you're pregnant and you know, like, hey, how is my supervisor going to work with me to help it be possible for me to be able to pump the appropriate amount of times during the day to feed my child. So yeah, just keep that in mind. So with Jacob, he nursed really well, exclusively breastfed. He was growing great, doing great, and then once he started at the nannies when he was right at 3.5 months old, and I had to go back to work, his weight just went way far down. Like, he was probably on the 10th percentile before then, and then he dropped down to the 5th percentile. And then his next checkup, he was on the 3rd percentile. And then his next checkup, he was in the negative, and I didn't even know how you could be in the negative. And if you don't know anything about percentiles, so that is when, if your child is in like the 95th percentile, that means they're larger than 95% of the children that are their same age, right? So that's impressive. 25th percentile, that means your child is larger than 25% of the children their age. 5th percentile, he was only larger than 5% of the children. And then he was in the negative. And our pediatrician was great. He was really understanding. And he was like, you just need to add a ton of fat to his diet. And I'm like, what do you mean? You know, like, we're not just going to sit there and feed him ice cream. He was like, no, butter, olive oil, avocados, peanut butter, all those things. So I would take his little rice cereal that he would eat when he was like 4.5, 5 months old, and we would mix peanut butter in it, mix that in, pour in some breast milk, mix that in, and then feed it to him. Applesauce, we mixed peanut butter into that. Because I made all my own baby food. I'm extremely thrifty, and if you want to save some money, making your own baby food is the way to go. Because if you go and buy these pouches that are super popular and you turn them around, the first ingredient is usually water. Well, why are you paying, 87 cents for a pouch when the first ingredient is water? Where if you have a little bit of time and do a little bit of prep work, you can make your own baby food, and then you know exactly what your child is getting. So usually Saturday morning, I would wake up after nursing him, and I would start chopping vegetables, and I'd boil them, and then I'd put them in the blender, blend them up, and then we had little ice trays that we would put them in. I'd pour it into that, cover it up with saran wrap, and freeze it, right? So then I knew, okay, it's time for him to eat. We would take out a little frozen cube, thaw it out, here you go, right? Sweet potatoes, carrots, green beans. What else did he love to eat? Those were his main ones. Squash, he was a big squash fan. I would do apples that way. I did pears that way. So yeah, he was a huge fan of that. He wasn't as big into like the peaches and pineapple and that type of stuff until later on in life. But then Jacob also had a very intense situation with constipation, and it was actually so bad. He was in the young toddler classroom, so he was right at a little over 2 years old, because he had turned 2 in September, and this was like October. So he was a little over 2 years old, and he was so constipated, like he didn't want to eat, and you could just push on his stomach and feel how hard it was, So I went out on my break and I got a suppository from the pharmacy and was able to stick it up his bottom, and 30 minutes later this boot came out that, I kid you not, was that long and that big around, and I was like, whoa buddy, now you feel a lot better. And so since then we were very adamant about making sure that he was eating more black beans and kidney beans and that type of thing, because he is also into vegetables and not as into fruits as Rochelle. I'm not sure why my children are like that, but that's how they are. So yeah, it's crazy, because you got to think about what they're eating, what they're consuming, even when they're not with you, and then how you can supplement that when they are with you, right? And it's really hard, especially when children are in school and you're like, well, it says they eat peaches, but I don't know. Does that mean, a serving size that's this big or a serving size that's that big, and if you're concerned about that, definitely feel free to talk to your child's teacher and see what's going on with that. And like myself as a teacher, I try to communicate very openly with parents when it comes to the nutrition their child is consuming, because we all know nutrition is a huge part of how you're feeling, what's going on, you know, how your body is, what you need. We went camping with a couple this past weekend, and they have a little boy that is right at 2.5. And Friday night he kept walking around, and he was just holding his little bottom. He was like, and I'm like, man, is he okay? You know, what's going on? And they're like, oh, he loves carbs, so he's kind of constipated, and he won't poop, and every time he has a little toot come out, it kind of scares him. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's difficult. And then they went in their camper, and they're like, oh, he just had the biggest poop ever. I know he's gonna feel better. And I'm like, oh yeah, because I know I feel better after having a big hearty bowel movement, and so do small children. So yeah, and it's hard, especially when they can't talk and tell you, like, my stomach hurts, you know, I ate too much cheese today, that type of thing. So just being very diligent and on top of, you know, what they're consuming and that type of thing. I want to talk a little bit about the failure to thrive that the chapter discussed. So that, as a parent who's, you know, well educated, trying to give the best nutrition to my child, Jacob was in that, you know, category of the failure to thrive. And I asked our pediatrician, hey, what can we do to make this happen so that he gets out of this failure to thrive? And he told us, put healthy fats in everything that he eats, you know. And I was like, really? And he's like, yes, you know, olive oil, avocados, butter, mix it all in. Because I told him, you know, this is how much he eats, this is how much he's nursing. He has 10 wet diapers a day. He pooped pretty regularly when he was exclusively breastfed, and then once we started on the rice cereal with the nanny, he would not poop as often. And I think the rice cereal was kind of constipating him, making him constipated a little bit. So that had some issues. And when you're constipated, you're not going to want to eat as much. And when you're not going to want to eat as much, you're not consuming as many calories. And so it's like a vicious cycle, right? So if your bowels are moving and they're healthy, you're going to feel like eating more. You're going to consume more calories. It's better for everybody, right? So yeah, finding ways to have your child consume healthy, good, delicious snacks, and giving them something that they will eat. The other day, my husband and I had a conversation. He was like, well, do you think, you know, some children are born picky eaters? And I was like, no, I think it's a product of their environment. Yes, naturally, there's going to be children that aren't going to like the taste of this or that, and that's very common. But when you see families that are like, oh, my son only eats chicken nuggets from Chick-fil-A, I'm like, really? Because I guarantee you, if you didn't go to Chick-fil-A for a whole week, he would eat something, right? So nowhere in history has a child ever starved themselves to death, right? So they might be hungry and they might go to bed hungry, but they're not going to go to bed hungry for 7 nights in a row, right? They're going to eat something. So providing them healthy snacks that they can eat. And if you eat with them, you know, they see mommy and daddy are eating the same thing I am. Let's do it, you know. Like I said, I'm a very spicy food person. I didn't put spices in a lot of the foods that I made for my children, but I would add a little bit, you know, a little bit of salt here, a little bit of pepper here, that type of thing, just to get them used to more diverse flavors than simply plain green beans, you know, because I was like, well, eventually they're gonna eat something, they're gonna be like, whoa, that tastes different. Why is that different, you know? So just to get them used to that whole, hey, this is what Brussels sprouts taste like when they've got a little bit of oil and salt and pepper on them. And then it's funny also because Rochelle is a very anti-condiment child. So she likes barbecue sauce and Polynesian sauce, and that's it. Whereas Jacob, he is a sauce fanatic, and whatever sauce that we're eating or trying, he's all about wanting to try it. And he was like, we're like, oh, hey, buddy, this is spicy, you know, and he's like, I don't care, let me try it, you know. So one time he was eating, it was after dinner, he had eaten his meal of pork chops and green beans, and I believe it was black beans we also had, my family loves beans. So we had that, and then we'd always finish him off with whole fat vanilla flavored Greek yogurt. And he was eating his yogurt just to kind of, fill in the empty spaces in his stomach, so he would go to bed full and happy. He was eating his yogurt, and Josh had some sriracha that he'd put on a little bit of his pork chop, and Jacob was like, I want some, what's that? And Josh was like, hey bud, this is spicy. And Jacob's like, no, I want some. So Josh squirted some in his vanilla yogurt, which I think is disgusting. And Jacob did, he ate it, and then you could see the look on his face as like the heat hit him, and he was like, oh, and we're like, drink some milk, this will help wash it down. But yeah, Jacob is very adventurous when it comes to branching out and trying new things, whereas Rochelle is very timid and like, you look like you might be trying to poison me with that. I'm not gonna eat it. So yeah, just try to be open-minded. All children will go through phases. One day they'll eat you out of house and home when it comes to avocados, and you go to the store and you'll buy 10 more avocados, and the next day they're like, no, I don't want avocados, I'm over that. Now I'm into grapes, or now I'm into bananas or something. So you just got to be willing to roll with it. Don't get angry, don't be mad that you bought all those avocados. Go home and make guacamole. If you don't have anyone to eat it, call me, I'll come eat your guacamole. I love it. But yeah, so just keep an open mind. It's gonna be okay. We will make it through this, right? It's gonna happen. So then I wanted to talk a little bit also about the SIDS, and I know our next position paper is on SIDS and the whole bed sharing concept. So that is a very sensitive subject, I think, and there's most professionals that you talk to in the healthcare world will tell you, it's okay if your baby sleeps in the same room as you, but not in your bed. And they do that just to help prevent SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. There's, no rhyme or reason as to why this 11-month-old child went to bed super healthy, super happy, and they didn't wake up, right? There's a huge back to sleep movement that the hospitals really work on when you have your child in the hospital, where, they say, hey, if you're laying your baby down, be sure to lay them down in their crib on their back so that they're not, hey, so that, and make sure there's nothing in their crib around them, no blankets, no pillows, no toys, no stuffed animals, none of that. I will tell you, one time we had my mother-in-law come over, and she was watching Rochelle, and this was before we had Jacob. Rochelle was in her crib, she was a baby, and we'd come in, from going out to dinner, and she's like, oh, she was cold, so I gave her a blanket. And I'm like, no, you can't do that. That's bad. We don't give her blankets in the bed. And I was very calm, but I went in there and I was like, I'm gonna take the blanket and get it out. And I told her about, SIDS and blankets and how they, children under the age of 1 year old cannot sleep with that. And she was like, oh, I didn't know that. I'm like, well, now you know. So the next time, we don't need her to sleep with a blanket. If she's cold, turn the heat up. I'd much rather pay for an astronomical power bill than have to explain to everyone, well, this happened with Rochelle. So yeah, read the article. I'm looking forward to reading everyone's position paper on that, which is not due for a while. I'm trying to think what else. I think so the chapter 5 quiz will be posted today, and you'll have a week to complete that. And then I will be sending out the midterm review before the end of this week. So look for that as well, and everything will be great. And if you have any questions, please email me. Let me know what's going on. If you have any concerns about anything, that would be wonderful. And I hope everyone takes care. And thank you so much.